What's up guys? Welcome to the first tutorial of 2020. I haven't done one of these in a while. I'm looking forward to it and hopefully I don't confuse the hell out of you with the way that I explain things. And I'm gonna try and not drag this out as long as it can possibly be and just keep it nice and simple. So we are obviously gonna be using After Effects in this, and if you haven't used After Effects, then this could be quite confusing, but what I'd recommend doing is just watching the whole video through once and then going back through and copying step by step to learn the process. The very first thing I want to talk about is to think about which clips that you're going to be transitioning. So this especially helps if you think about it when you're filming. The previous video I did to this was the Welcome to 2020 video where we were using a dirt bike. I had my mate Pete sitting on the dirt bike. In one shot, it was just a front on static shot. The second clip was a shot of the wheel spinning in the dirt or a burnout. So when I was filming, I thought that if I was to use a spin transition there, having the second clip spinning as well, it would just flow really nicely together, and it ended up working quite well. So it really helps if you do think about this when you're filming, or just have a good think about which clips are gonna work well together when you are thinking about using that transition. A lot of thinking words in there. The second thing is obviously that the spin transition is nothing new. It's been around for a while. The premise behind it is to use the rotation keyframes and keyframing a rotation in between the two clips using an adjustment layer and the transform effect if you are using After Effects. What we're gonna do here is actually ramp up and into that spin and then continue that rotation slightly afterwards, just so it flows that little bit better. And the third thing is the effects that I've used alongside the transition. These are all subjective to you. If you think that certain effects are gonna work better with your transition, by all means go for it. This is just the particular effects that I chose to use with mine. Anyways, getting into this. Once you've got After Effects open and your two clips dropped in, I'm using two clips from the intro that I showed you of Hannah walking down the beach and then in the bushes. I'll just give you a quick preview again. The very first thing we want to do after that is search for an effect called Motion Tile in your effects and presets. And then drag the Motion Tile onto both clips. The first thing you want to do is tick your mirror edges and then change the output width and the output height to 300. Once you've done it on the first clip, you can just copy and then paste it to the second one. What that's gonna do is expand the edges of the clips so that when you do the spin and the rotation effect, you're not gonna see any black, and it's just gonna mimic what it's already got in the frame. You're not gonna see it because of the blur, but what I've also done is that I've left a bit of room on the edges of two clips so that I can zoom in at the end of the clip just to hide any edges that you do see. So after we've done the motion tile effect on both of those two clips, we then wanna create an adjustment layer. On your adjustment layer, you want to search for an effect called Transform. I'll actually click it. And then drag the Transform effect onto the adjustment layer. This is where we're gonna do the rotation and the spin effect. So this is the base of the whole transition. What we wanna do is open it up. Now, it's important that you don't choose the, under the little arrow here, choose the transform that's showing. You actually want to go into the effects and then open up the transform in there. So it's got a few more options. So the next thing is go to the middle of the two clips. Now this is going to depend and vary on which, this is going to vary and depend on which clips that you're using and how fast you want the spin to actually go. In most cases for me, I do generally between 3 and 5 keyframes either side of the center of the two clips. So in this case, we're gonna go 5. So you go to the center of the two clips and then count back 5 frames. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then make a keyframe under rotation. Just go back to the center again and then count forwards 5 frames. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And make another keyframe. This is where we're going to, like I said, do the spin. The next thing that we want to do is ramp up and into the spin rather than just having it do, you know, going straight and then just do a quick spin like most of them teach you and most of the transitions actually work. I want to actually ramp this spin up. So it doesn't really matter. It's up to you how far you want to go back. In this case, I used around 20 frames before the start of the first keyframe. So I'm just going to count back 20 quickly. and then make another keyframe here. So starting from being obviously in the neutral position, we then want to begin the rotation here. So what I'm going to do is go to the second keyframe, highlight that one, and change the rotation to 10 degrees. What that's going to do is, obviously, if you just preview it, it's going to start to turn. Once you get to the second and the third keyframe, like I said, this is where your main rotation is going to happen. So if you just go to the third one, what we want to do now is rotate 360 degrees. What you can actually do is just under the rotation tab here, if you just put a 1 next to the X, that's the same as writing 360 degrees. So it's either or, it doesn't really matter. If we preview it now, you see it starts to spin and then the main spin happens. That's the first part done. Now, the next thing that we want to do is continue. Basically, the whole point behind doing this is to continue the motion of the rotation. So when you do finish the full spin, it doesn't just stop there. So what we're going to do is continue that rotation slightly and then keyframe this in. So now for the purpose of this tutorial, I've got quite a long clip here. So I'm going to make 3 keyframes and do them every 2 seconds. So we're obviously on 6 seconds here. We're just going to go forwards to 8. If your footage is not long enough to do this, then you can do it quicker. It's just going to mean that the extra little bit of rotation is just going to happen a little bit quicker. So if you do have the longer footage, just do them for the purpose of this every 2 seconds. I'm going to make 3 of them like I said. So if we go to the 4th keyframe here, which is where the rotation is going to continue slightly, we want to add an extra 5 degrees. So obviously you've got your 360 degree rotation. We then want to put it forwards another 5 degrees, which is then obviously going to have the spin, and then it's going to continue to obviously rotate slightly there. Another thing to note here is this, once we start adding blurs and everything to this transition, it does get quite CPU intensive. I've had this program crash on me multiple times, so I save my work very consistently just because it's a pain in the ass when it crashes and you have to start all over again. It's to save your work. All right, as I said, the rotation is going to continue on slightly to 5 degrees. We're then going to go to the 5th keyframe here, which is where we're going to go backwards 5 degrees from the neutral point, which is obviously going to be either 355 degrees, or if you just put -5, it'll change it to 355 for you. So basically this is going to go forwards 5 degrees and then go back the other way 5 degrees. Obviously, if we go to the last keyframe here, that one's going to be left at 0 because that's where we want the rotation to stop and go back to the start again. So if I just give you a quick preview of this one as well, you'll see that the spin ramps up slightly, does the spin, and then it's going to continue that motion on forwards 5 degrees, backwards 10 degrees, and then back to the start again. It obviously looks a little bit, don't know what the right word is, but clunky at the moment, I guess. So it doesn't have any, there's no ramps basically, it just is all at the one speed. So what we want to do now is easy ease all of these keyframes. So you can just highlight them all. I'm using a Mac, so it's just function F9. That's going to change all the keyframes to be easy eased. I think that's the right way of saying it now. So once you've highlighted that first keyframe, we want to open up the graph editor, which is this little button here. This is going to allow us to manipulate the speed of each keyframe. Now, you've got 2 options in here. You want to choose the edit value graph. So with this little button here, choose graph type and options, open that one up and just check that your edit value graph is selected. Just makes it a little bit easier for working with this particular transition. Now, because there is a 360 degree spin here, the keyframes, you're not going to be able to actually see the curves in the lines here. So what you'll actually need to do is just zoom in using the plus or the minus here, and it'll just give you a bit more of an idea of what's going on between the two. So with the first keyframe highlighted, we want to grab this little thing here and just drag it mostly towards the end. This is going to let us ramp up and into the spin rather than just having it moving at that one constant speed. Grab the second one and adjust that slightly as so. Now, if we just preview that here, you'll see that it starts to ramp up and into the spin, which just makes it look a little bit better. After you've done that, I leave the curve between the second and the third keyframe. So if you just zoom out, I leave the curve between these two alone as it does its own thing with the easy ease. It obviously ramps into the middle, it gets fast in the very center of that spin and then comes back out a little bit slower. So if we move on to the third and the fourth keyframe, again, just zooming out, third and fourth of these two here, what we want to do is just zoom in slightly. We want to ramp out of this because obviously it's just come out of that fast spin. You don't want it to come out and be slow. You want it to come out and be a little bit faster and then slow down. So if we just adjust this little one here, we want to try and follow the curve with this as well. So obviously it's curving up. You want to continue that curve on. It's quite important not to overdo this though, because this is going to push your spin further than that 5 degrees and then bring it back to the 5 degrees, which is obviously at the second keyframe here. So if we just preview that here, you'll see that it just continues that spin on. If you look closely down the bottom, you can see that the motion tiled edge starts to come into view a little bit. So that's why I said if you leave a little bit more space when you're filming, you can zoom in at the end and then you can get rid of all that. So once you've done that, you want to go to the 4th keyframe here and just pull this one back more towards the start. What we're going to do now is try and keep the curve of these lines here flowing so that it continues the speed of the rotation, because you don't want to have it slow down in some parts and then speed up again. It's just going to look weird. So if we go to that 4th keyframe, just move over slightly and then zoom into the graph a little bit, you'll see that the curve here continues to come out. It's going to come down. After that, it doesn't follow the same line. So we want to try and continue the direction of that line. So if we pull this one here to be more in line with that curve, it's just going to keep that speed going. Moving on to the 5th, I'm pretty sure that one is. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, yep. The 5th, you don't have to do much there because the spin's obviously continuing, because the curve is continuing on as it's supposed to. And then between the 5th and the 6th, obviously you just want to easy ease into the very end of that last keyframe again. Pull that one forward slightly. So if we just preview that one now, you'll see that it ramps up into the spin. It's going to continue that rotation on slightly, back the other direction, and then back to the neutral point. So to me, this is just going to make your spin transition that little bit better, because it's going to continue the flow of the spin for a little bit after it's happened and then back to the neutral point again. That's the main part of the spin done. Anyway, I hope I haven't bored you too much. The next thing to do is obviously add some motion blur to that. I don't like the CC Force motion blur on the spin transition. I just think it looks a bit tacky to me. You can obviously use whatever you like. The one that I used for the intro shot was the CC Radial Fast Blur. You've got a couple of different options here, but I liked the Radial Fast Blur there. So if you want to drag and drop that onto your adjustment layer here as well. We're going to need to keyframe this in because otherwise it's just going to be blurry the whole time and you don't want that. Like I said, save your project here. This does get quite CPU intensive and I've had multiple crashes when I've been trying to do this. So again, save your work. I can't tell you enough. For this particular blur that I did, I go 2 frames either side the center of the transition. So if you just go back to the center of the transition here and then go backwards 2, you then want to open up your CC Radial Fast Blur and turn the keyframes on for amount. Go forwards to the center again and then forwards 2 more, make another keyframe here. So I changed these 2 values to be 90, which is obviously going to make it very blurry and just hide that motion tile and hide those edges that come in. Change the first to 90 as well. After that, I then made 2 more keyframes either side of those 2. Now I went 15 frames backwards for these, so 15. Turn the keyframes on there as well. You can play around with this. It doesn't have to be 15 or whatever, just whatever you think looks good. When you're previewing this, I'd suggest probably putting or dropping the quality of it just so it doesn't take ages to render. I spend half my life waiting for stuff to render. 15. After you've made those 2 keyframes either side, just turn them to, make them the value of 0. Same with the start. Now what I do here is just ramp in and out of the blur here as well. So I don't easy ease all 4 of them. I just do the 2 either side. You want to change this one to easy ease out, and then the one at the very end, you want to make that one easy ease in. Again, if you just open up the graph editor when you're doing that and just pull these 2 either side slightly forwards, just to give it a bit of a ramp so it's not going to be not blurry, blurry, and then not blurry again. It just makes it go in and out of the blur a little bit better. Saving that before I preview it. I've learned my lesson many a times with that. Previewing that, you can see that the blur ramps in and then out. It just looks, to me, maybe it's just my opinion, a whole lot better than the CC Force motion blur, or just turning on the motion blur with these little buttons down here. So that's the main part of your blur done. Now, in the intro, mine did look slightly different because basically what I did was add a mesh warp on top of that as well. I then also put a gradient wipe on the first clip, just so it sort of blended the two together. So if we just go up and search for the mesh warp under the effects and presets, and then just drag and drop that underneath the radial fast blur, above the radial fast blur on your adjustment layer, it's probably a good idea to turn off the blur while you're doing this, because it's just going to take way too long to render and preview as well. So I'm just going to go ahead and turn that one off there. So we're going to need to add a few more keyframes to this. We're going to want to go to the very end of the first clip. So we just zoom in and then go to the frame, before the end of the first clip. Open up your mesh warp, and under your distortion mesh, leave the settings at 7, 7, and 8, because I was fine with that. Turn the keyframes on for your distortion mesh, I can't get that word out. Move forwards 1 frame to the start of the second clip and create another keyframe for your distortion mesh. I got it right that time. I then put the keyframes either side, 6 frames either side of those two. So if we just count forward 6, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yes, I can count. Create another keyframe under the distortion mesh. Go to back to the first keyframe and then count backwards 6. And then create your last keyframe there. So basically it's, again, you're just gonna have it from the neutral point here. When it gets up to the main part of the spin transition, I just wanted to distort the footage a little bit. So what I did was just grab these two intersections here, dragged that one backwards a little bit there, and then adjusted the curve of these, not the curve, sorry, the rotation of those. I then adjusted this one here, pulled it down a little bit, and did the same with that side there. When you move forwards to the third keyframe, which is obviously the start of the second clip, you need to adjust it as well. So if you just grab the same intersections again and just pull them slightly, and then adjust the rotation of them as well. And the same with this one. You may have to do a couple more on the second frame just to, because obviously as the clip's moving, the subject will move, or whatever it is that you're trying to make warp will move. So you might have to add an extra little bit of distortion here as well. Not too much, just a little bit. Once we blur it out, you'll see what I mean. Looks all squiggly there. Again, you just want to ease in and ease out of this effect. So if you just go to the very end keyframe and then just ease into that one, go to the very first keyframe and then ease out of that one there. Once you have the first one highlighted again, just open up your graph editor here and just drag this a little bit more towards the center, probably to about 90% works. And the same with the end one there, roughly 90%. You'll make some little weird shape like this. And now, if we just preview this, more rendering times, I'll turn the blur back on for this and save my project again. So previewing this, you'll see it's very subtle in there, but it just gives that little bit of distortion towards the center of the transition. Gives it a nice little touch, I reckon. Up to you whether or not you wanted to do that. Personally, I just wanted to add something a little bit extra to this one. The very last thing I did was obviously the gradient wipe, which again is something that you can do if you want to, but the way that I did it, obviously if you just search for the gradient wipe under your effects and presets, now you have to drop this onto your first clip. You can't drop it onto the adjustment layer, otherwise it's just going to reveal black, which is not going to work. Under the transition, just drag and drop your gradient wipe onto that first clip. Now what you have to do to make this one work is extend the edges of the clip. So if you extend the end of the first clip 4 frames, 1, 2, 3, 4, doing a lot of counting in this tutorial, it's great. And then the start of the second clip 4 frames, 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, once you've extended those 2 clips 4 frames either side, you want to go back to the middle of the spin transition, which is the start of the second clip. If you're having trouble finding that, you've made a keyframe on the start of the second clip at the distortion mesh, which is the third keyframe there. So once you go to there, you want to click the little drop down arrow for the first clip and then go to your effects and into your gradient wipe effect. We basically need to keyframe in this little extra transition here. So just make a keyframe at the center here for your transition and make that one 50% here. Again, you'll probably want to turn off your motion blur here actually, just because it's going to make it ridiculously hard to preview. You'll be waiting hours like I do. And then if you just want to go forwards 4 frames, make another keyframe at the end there and just pull that one up to 100%. Back to the middle, sorry, back to the first one, and then go backwards 4 frames again, which is going to be the start of the second clip here. I like to explain things the roundabout way sometimes, so I'm really sorry, but we get there in the end. And then just change that first keyframe to 0, bring it back to 0, so you should have the 1, 2, and the 3 there. The middle one's not really necessary, but I just make it so I know where the start of that clip is. So if we just preview that one with the gradient wipe on, it's just going to blend the 2 clips together a little bit more. I'd probably turn up the transition softness to about 50% here as well. Maybe even further, we'll go 75 and then just go to the middle. It's just gonna blend those two a little bit more softly together. You're probably not even gonna see it because you're gonna have that motion blur on. So that's the last effect that I added to this transition. I'm just gonna close this one down. Turn the CC Fast Radial Blur back on, and you should, close this all down, end up with something like this. That's it for this video today, guys. Let me know your thoughts, like and subscribe if you're feeling this. Link me any videos that you have done anything similar to this or that you've used this transition. I wouldn't mind checking them out, and I will see you next week. Bye.
When the truth don't work, you start telling lies. Thought you were down to ride, you weren't down to ride. Caught switching, you were picking sides. Don't blink, caught slipping like a slip and slide. I was shooting dice till I got a nosebleed. Money on the floor, can't get cold feet. Took a L, should've put it in the all free. Lord forgive me for my sins, don't know of me.